The Nile shimmered under a pale moon, its surface broken by ripples that carried more than fish or reeds. To Hebrew families along its banks, every splash was a terror. At night, mothers hushed their infants, pressing them close, praying the sound of their cries would not betray them. Fathers kept watch at the doorways, ears tuned for the tramp of soldiers' sandals. The river, once the lifeline of Egypt, had become an accomplice to a crime. It was here that Pharaoh's order was carried out. Newborn Hebrew boys were to be drowned. It was not a rumor, not a passing cruelty, but royal decree. Egypt was a kingdom forged by ambition, its monuments a testament to rulers who demanded both awe and fear. But beneath the grandeur was a reliance on slave labor, and the Hebrews had become the backbone of Pharaoh's projects. For years their numbers had grown. What had once been a tolerated people were now seen as a threat. Pharaoh, convinced that multiplying Hebrews could one day rise against him, chose to preempt rebellion with infanticide. This was not simply population control, it was psychological warfare, a dismantling of family and future through the most intimate wound, the death of children. The order spread quickly. Scribes announced it in marketplaces, soldiers enforced it in alleys, and whispers carried it from household to household. Drown the boys, leave the girls, break their strength before it grows. For Hebrew parents, each birth was no longer a joy, but a calculation. Could they hide the child? Would a neighbor betray them? Would a soldier appear before dawn? Mothers learned to swaddle their babies in silence, rocking them not to sleep, but to secrecy. Fathers dug shallow hiding places beneath floorboards. Entire households lived in suspense, every creak of wood or bark of a dog a signal of doom. The Nile itself became haunted. Residents could no longer look upon it without seeing its second role, as a graveyard. Children were wrenched from arms and cast into the current. The river carried them away as if erasing their existence. Grief spread like an infection, each family knowing another who had lost a child, each loss cutting into the community's hope. Some whispered their questions to God in the night, others raged silently at the heavens, but all of them lived beneath the same terror. Pharaoh had not left enforcement solely to his soldiers. He pulled ordinary Egyptians into complicity, instructing them to watch their neighbors, to ensure the decree was obeyed. Fear and suspicion thickened the air. Every cough behind a closed door could be a child. Every wail quickly silenced raised suspicion. It was tyranny not just from above, but from within, a corruption of daily life that turned civilians into enforcers. Into this darkness stepped two unlikely figures, Shiphrah and Puah, Hebrew midwives. Their work had always been bound to life and risk, steadying mothers through the ordeal of childbirth, pulling new breath into fragile lungs. When Pharaoh summoned them, he made his command personal. He expected obedience. They were not soldiers, not nobles, merely women he assumed would bow. But Shiphrah and Puah feared God more than Pharaoh. His crown meant less to them than their conscience. Their resistance was quiet but deliberate. When a child was born, they coaxed life instead of extinguishing it. They lingered just long enough to ensure the mother could hold her baby before soldiers might arrive. When questioned, they deflected. The Hebrew women give birth quickly, they told Pharaoh's agents. By the time we arrive, the child is already delivered. Their excuse rang plausible. In truth, it was cover for an act of civil disobedience at its most dangerous. Every visit carried the risk of exposure. Every newborn boy they helped deliver could be discovered by patrols. The punishment for disobeying Pharaoh would not have been lenient. It would have been death. Still, Shiphrah and Puah continued. Their defiance spread courage. Families whispered their names with reverence, knowing someone was standing between them and Pharaoh's order. Each spared life was more than a child saved. It was a statement that Pharaoh's reach was not absolute. But the decree did not vanish. Soldiers continued their searches. The Nile continued to claim lives. For every child hidden, another was lost. The tension never eased. It was a community under siege, and the trauma marked them as deeply as the whip and the yoke of slavery. Children's laughter, once the rhythm of neighborhood streets, became rare. Their absence was its own sound, hollow and heavy. Pharaoh grew frustrated by the gaps in his system. His paranoia deepened. He pressed for stricter enforcement, urging Egyptians to keep watch for hidden infants. The violence became not just a tool of control, but a performance of power. Yet even as Pharaoh pressed harder, resistance survived. Among the spared children was one whose life would alter the course of history. His parents hid him for months, and when they could no longer, they placed him in a basket, sealed it with pitch, and set it afloat on the Nile. What was meant as a river of death became for him a path to survival. He was found by Pharaoh's own daughter. That child was Moses. The irony was sharp. The king who sought to drown a people's future inadvertently sheltered the very leader who would one day confront him. Moses would grow up in Pharaoh's palace, educated in Egypt's halls of power, while his people still labored in chains. His life was made possible by the courage of women who refused to comply, by the midwives who defied orders, by a mother who trusted the river in desperation, by a sister who watched from the reeds. Pharaoh's decree stands as one of history's most chilling crimes, an act of genocide cloaked in legality. No archive records the names of the drowned. Their lives were erased before they began, their families left with empty arms and haunted memories. But the defiance of Shifra and Puah is remembered, their names preserved in a story where Pharaoh himself is left nameless. In a kingdom that built monuments to make rulers eternal, it is the midwives' act of mercy that endures. What happened in Egypt is a story of power and fear, but also of conscience. It shows how a system can be corrupted from the top, how violence can be normalized, how ordinary people can be pulled into atrocity. But it also shows how resistance can begin with the smallest choices, with two women refusing to obey a command that violated their deepest sense of justice. The river still flows, carrying memory along with water. To Pharaoh, it was a tool of destruction. To the Hebrews, it was a place of grief. To one child in a basket, it became deliverance. The decree was meant to end a future. Instead, it set the stage for a story of liberation the king could never imagine. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more stories from the most dangerous book ever written.